This video is going to go through the procedures of receiving and setting up a Bailey Pro X pottery wheel. When shipped by UPS or FedEx, you're going to be receiving two boxes. The box to the left is going to have the counter and pan assembly, and this is going to have the frame assembly. We're going to go through the procedures of removing the parts and spreading them out so you can see all the nuts and bolts and belts and assemble the wheel. Flip the counter box over so you can see the label here, and it says note, open other side of the wheel box to remove the ergo counter. So it's important when you see this to put that side down and remove the components from the top side. Now the first thing you're going to see is the ergo counter, and when that is removed, there's the Pro X. Just pull it straight up, and you've got the bottom pulley right here in parts, instructions, and get it out, remove any of the foam, and get ready to assemble. This, by the way, is the hardware and instructions for the ergo counter. Okay, let's open up the mainframe box. This is the way you'll receive it. You got the belt guard, and other components in this box, and this is the starter kit. And more or less, you're just going to lift the frame up and away. The first stage of assembly is to get the counter pan attached to the top of the frame. So once that's bolted in, then we're going to attach the large take-up pulley that's under the wheel head, and then we'll get the belt mounted between the motor pulley and the large pulley, and finally we'll set the tension. There'll be a couple other details, and then we'll get to mounting the drain tube, the control panel, and finally the ergo counter. All the hardware is laid out for attaching the Pro counter to the mainframe. And we have 5/16 bolts here, two different lengths, and 1/4-20s right here. So you'll want to have a socket wrench in both 1/2 inch and 7/16 drivers. Okay, when you lower the Pro counter down, you got to drop it down evenly. It might even be easier to have a helper and the two of you settle it down together. All right, so that's step one. Now we're going to start to add the hardware. To prep the hardware, what you're going to do is take a flat washer, drop that down first, followed by 2 locks. And when you're all done, that's what it's going to look like. Also, for these shorter 5/16 bolts, you're going to have 1 lock washer drop down first and finish with the flat. So that's the 2 styles. We'll start with this one, and that is the longer 5/16, flat washer first, 2 locks on top. Now we've turned the wheel upside down, and because of the frame, there's going to be a gap here. So we take some of the foam from the boxing, and we're just going to put it underneath to elevate it. There we go. So now we're going to start by putting the hardware in, and this is the shorter 5/16 that's 3/4 of an inch long. And we're just finger tightening it. So when it goes in, flat washer is down, the lock, and the head. And you always put all bolts in and you keep everything loose. You don't tighten anything because we need to put in all the hardware all the way around. And by keeping it loose, we can still adjust the frame as needed so all bolts synchronize with the underside of the wood. Just to repeat, these were the 3/4 inch long 5/16 bolts, the shorter of the two, okay? And now we're going for the 4 1-inch long, and that had the different pattern where you have the flat right against the nut and 2 lock washers under it. Okay, so we're gonna put those in. All finger tight, getting all bolts in before we start to tighten up the frame into the wood. Over on this side, we have this foil that grounds the wheel head to the metal frame, and you will need to take an object, you can just use the Allen wrench here, and poke through the foil so you define the hole. Just wiggle it around, right, and now you'll just take the same hardware and thread it right in. Right, all the bolts had been placed. That was the last one. So now it's a matter of going around and snugging up all the bolts. You have to be careful not to over tighten though, just reasonable force. The next step is to put on the large pulley. You want to be sure that you use this side of the pulley. Now that is the short side of the hub. Obviously this is the large side of the hub with the set screw. So with the short side, that is going to face the wood. And also the set screw here, want to make sure it's not sticking into the hole at all and it's totally clear. And the set screw is going to synchronize with this flat. So now it's time to just gently work it down by wiggling it. Okay, in goes the Allen wrench. Before we tighten it in, we want to be sure that the set screw is aimed right at the center of that flat. And if you look right now, it isn't. It's off center. So that is now perfect center, and with perfect center, we will tighten that into place. Now that has to be good and snug, and just to review, this needed to be down all the way. The set screw and the large side of the hub is away from the wood, and the short side of the hub faces the bearing. That's important because that's going to create the correct belt alignment. Belt alignment. So to review, it's very important to tighten in the set screw sufficiently. If you don't do it enough, this is going to work its way loose, and when the wheel is turned back upright, obviously, that pulley could slide down, or it could start making a knocking sound, because if this is loose, it can shift back and forth on the flat. So dead center, snug it up really tight, and you're all set. The next step is to mount the multi-rib belt. And multi-rib belt has a series of grooves in it. And you can see 4 V-shaped rubber ribs there. And they're going to conform to the drive pulley, which is the negative of it. And the multi-rib is going to be in about the center of this drive pulley. And then it's a friction fit on the big take-up pulley. So we start by putting the belt midway, and we walk it around the take-up pulley. So you just rotate it and it'll flex on. We're pretty close to the bottom, so we're going to just lift and rotate to expose 2 grooves at the bottom here. And that's the right placement. And it'll naturally find home on the big take-up pulley. Now that the belt's been mounted, we want to check the tension. At the factory, we set a tolerance between this back plate and the motor plate of 15/16, and that's where we tightened in all the bolts. Now, the nut you see right here is a Nylox nut, meaning it has nylon that acts as a sort of locking device on the threaded shaft, so there's no movement. On the back side of the mounting plate, we also have a Nylox nut, which doesn't require a lock washer. It just gives friction, so if we make an adjustment, it'll stay right there. The same nut is on the top. However, on the top, on this side, you'll note there is no nut on this side, only what's holding on the bracket. Let's compare that to below. See, here we do have a nut. Now, to tension and adjust the tension of the belt at this stage, it's a fine adjustment, and we'd only be adjusting the tilt either backward or forward. It would go forward if this was too tight, and it would go backward if we needed to add some tension. And it doesn't take much to create slackness or tightness. It could be a quarter turn of one of these nuts on the backside. So we're going to tip the wheel in a moment, and we're going to show you how we test the tension of the belt. Here's how we're going to test tension. First, you're going to need a ruler, and you're going to place the ruler so that on the back side of the big pulley, it's resting on the metal, not the belt, but it's inside this area, but on the back side. And you can see forward, we're resting it also on this pulley. So we have a straight line created on the ruler. Then, in a moment, the test will be to take your finger and lift up on the belt, and we want to check out the gap underneath. Now, it should be about a 1/2 inch up, and you feel definite tension. That's about a 1/2 inch up. If you start to lift it and it's already super snug and you can only go a quarter, then we'd want to loosen the belt a little bit by adjusting the motor and fractionally to bring the motor this direction to release tension. And if you were to pull it up, let's say 3/4 of an inch, now we're really pulling there. Well, that'd be too much slack. And then we'd be adjusting and pulling just the top of the motor back away from the big pulley, and that'll correct the tension again. So the goal is that you put a finger in the midpoint and pulling upward, you're about a 1/2 inch before you feel a really snug belt. To recap, we don't want to over-tension the belt because it adds stress on bearings, both the main bearing and the motor bearing. So a super tight belt is working against you, and it's also going to be noisier. You're going to hear more bearing noise. Conversely, if you have the belt really loose, it's not going to grab enough and you're going to have slippage when you center. So what we showed you with this technique of seeing about a 1/2 inch of travel before you feel definite resistance, that's the perfect load. And you'll have a quieter wheel but you'll have good traction. If the belt had been a little loose, we need to bring the drive pulley back, and that will tension the belt. You never make adjustments down below. We set that at the factory. You're going to come to the top bolt on the back side, and you would put a wrench on, and you would turn it only 1/8 of a turn, each of these, in balance. It's like going from the 12 o'clock position to the 1 o'clock, or maybe the 2 o'clock position. That's it. That's all the turn necessary on both nuts to make a significant difference. If the opposite condition occurs, where the belt is too tight and you need to loosen it, well, then we come to the same two top nuts, and this time we would turn counterclockwise, the same 12 to like the 10 o'clock position on both, and then retest it. The next step is to put on the drain tube. The drain tube has a hole and a thread chased into it. And this is how you're going to attach it to the frame, or rest it on the frame. So you take this 1/4-20 bolt, you put on a fender washer and this little sleeve of vinyl, and the other fender washer, and you're going to thread a nut right up against this, but don't tighten it down, just till it touches. And then you'll put the second nut, thread that. So now we have two nuts right against one another, and you're going to take two 7/16 wrenches and tighten the two nuts upon themselves. It's called jamming, just so it locks. All right, so they're good and firm now. They've been tightened in, they're jammed, and you're going to be attaching that. Okay, so now we're going to thread that assembly into the side of the drain pipe. You don't have to really tighten it beyond finger. In, under, you sort of angled up into the flange, and the two fender washers are on either side of the tube, and the bungee is going to go around the pipe and the back beam, and that holds it from kicking out. The next step is to attach the controller. The controller bracket has two holes. We have two holes over here on the frame, two 1/4-20 bolts that are 3/4 long, each with lock and nut. Now we have the wheel on its side so you get a better view, but when you go to attach this, you may want to tip the wheel back and right it just as you would throw on it, because it does give you a bit better access for one of the bolts that is lower here. All right, but let's first start out by plugging it in. Okay. And we're pushing the bolt that direction. On goes a lock and then a nut. This will be a 7/16 driver to snug up. We've plugged it in. Turn on power. This is your directional switch. There's a neutral, and you can either go reverse or forward. Give it some speed. Have a look at the belt. Okay, the belt is tracking nicely. We've turned off the unit, and before you put on the pulley guard, you want to unplug it. Okay, So we'll start out with this section of the pulley guard, and you're going to be using the 5/16 with the flat and the lock. So we've aligned the hole in the guard with the hole in the wood. And the last step is to put on the large section of the pulley guard. Now you see that we have notches at 4 points, and one over on that side. And the reason we had previously put the 2 lock washers under the flat washer at these 4 points was to create the tolerance so this black plastic will slide underneath. So that tucks right under the flat washer. And there's flexibility, so we just pulled in a little bit on this side, and it tucked right under the larger flat washer at each point. And that's complete. So now we can right the wheel. And you're ready to go.